We are just about to begin the flight, so if you can buckle your seatbelts, trays up, seats upright, exits on the sides. I think you guys know the drill. Hey, hi everybody. My name's Dave Reek. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, which is why I was asking about your summer vacations earlier. But in my day job, I'm a senior product manager for Tableau. I work in Tableau Online, and the feature that I work on is called the Online Sync Client. We're talking about things that are a little bit broader than that today, but before we get into that, I thought I'd tell you a little bit about who I actually am. When I'm not working on software, I'm off riding my crazy bicycle across the country. So this summer's summer adventure was racing in the world's longest mountain bike race. So this is between Idaho and Montana, and about a third of the way to the finish. You can see I'm pretty happy to have made it out of Montana, just starting into Idaho there. But I don't always do that. I also have miniature humans, as I know some of you do here, and there they are. And also some other full-grown humans that help me with the miniature humans. And then I work with my software team. This is a bunch of people that I work with on a daily basis to make Tableau do everything that it does. They have no idea that I put their picture in here, so please don't tell them. But even when I'm off riding my bicycle around, there's one thing that always brings me back to getting data to the right place. Oh, this is one more little slide here. This is up at 9,000 feet on the Continental Divide, which is where this bike race goes across. Come up later, we'll talk about it. But as we was riding through Wyoming, we got to the Wyoming wildlife. This is all the wildlife I saw in Wyoming. And this is a big pump, right? You know, pumps oil out of the ground. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is sort of how you can pump your data into online. So just made me think about that. And I wanted to show you some pictures from my trip. So having said that, come on in, come up front. Having said that, hey, here are some of the things we're going to talk about today. Really some concepts about keeping your data fresh in online. A few words about your data itself and sort of how to keep it effectively near online. 3 types of data that we're going to talk about: cloud-based data, on-premises data, or on-prem is the way I usually say it here. You may see it occasionally spelled in this deck as on-premise. But just imagine that it actually says a real English word here, meaning in a house. And then web data connectors right at the very end. There are a couple other things we'll cover as well. And then a few words about extracts and how to make your extracts a little bit fancier. So there's a lot of words. There's quite a bit of material here. Please let me know if we're going too fast or too slowly. There are a few notepads on the corner here. If you can hold your question, we may get to it. So I'd love to take questions at the end, but if you have a burning issue or you see something large behind me, feel free to interrupt and let me know. There's really 3 things that I want you to come away with today. Come on up front, guys. Your vises, your online vises, you can keep them fresh. Like just as a blanket statement, you can do that. We'll talk about how to get there. And the way to get there is make sure that you're publishing your vises in a way that you can actually refresh them over time. And refreshes happen pretty much where the application lives. If your data is in online, the refresh actually happens in online. If your data is on premises, the refresh actually happens on premises. And if those are mysterious words, hang on and we'll get there. I do want to just spell out what I mean by cloud versus on-premises for a second. People have asked me this in the past. By on-premises, I really mean things that are not accessible to online, which is Tableau server living on the internet. So anything that's back behind a firewall, anything that's protected and online will not be able to access directly is what we mean by on-premises. All right, moving along. Just a couple key concepts. We're going to go over the technical stuff, the technical concepts up in the beginning here, and then I'll give you an analogy to sort of deal with this a little bit later on. But your dashboards can have fresh data. Online connects to a wide variety of data sources. You can see there's a little word cloud out here. The things in blue are things that we can connect to directly. Online can just go off and talk to your Redshift database, but we also can connect to a wide variety of on-premises databases. I think Tableau, I think we have about 50 different data sources we connect to overall, and there's no reason the stuff that is on-prem that we, it's not that we can't go get it or that it can't be got. So many different types of data, cloud and on-premises, live or extracted, and we'll talk about published versus embedded in a few minutes here. All this data can be refreshed automatically. And when I say refresh, I mean either just going and getting the new data via a query or using an extract and go getting a bulk delivery of data at one time and then refreshing it at a scheduled basis. And really, how you get it depends on where it is and how you published it. So a few little things from the beginning there. I talked a little bit about on-premise versus cloud, and I hope that was pretty clear. If your data is behind a firewall or if it is inaccessible to the internet, you're pretty much what we would consider to be on-premises. If you are hosted on a cloud service, many cloud services, most databases actually have a firewall, but as long as you open the right ports, online can talk to it directly. And a few special things about how we access that data. I do want to mention quickly here the little cans that you can see. There's maybe three on the left and two on the right. Those are actually icons that we use throughout Tableau. So the two cans here represent an extract where we would say, grab a bunch of data and pull it to online. Then the one can is sort of more of a live query. So I'll use them in this talk, but you'll also see them in the product, and that's kind of what they mean. It's a handy little cheat sheet, so you can think about that in the future. A couple examples of these types of data, on-premises data, you can imagine that being something like Microsoft SQL Server. You have a machine, it's running Microsoft SQL Server, you connect it with Tableau Desktop, so perfectly valid on-premises data source. But you'll also see it over on the cloud side, because you can certainly stand up Microsoft SQL Server in a variety of cloud platforms. You can stand it up as an individual machine in AWS, host it as a service in Azure. There are a couple different types of data that are really can only be one or the other. Google Analytics and Salesforce are examples of things that live on the cloud. They don't really ever come online, like Salesforce doesn't live in your house. So you can really only connect to those as extracted data. Looking ahead here. The Salesforce is what I mean, and Google BigQuery. Those are things that there is no on-premises Google BigQuery. You can do some fancy things like connecting a VPN to Google BigQuery and making it appear online, but we're not going to talk about that too much for today's purposes. Excel and Oracle are other examples of things that really are, they're really only things you would find on premises. And Excel is a file-based data source. It's not really a way to just kind of put it on the internet. We can talk about Google Sheets later if you'd like. One other concept to think about here is a live query versus an extract. So live query means you're querying the database. An extract is where usually at a scheduled time, you would go and grab all the data that you want at one time and make a copy of it actually. You can either do this in Tableau Server, you can do it in Tableau Desktop, but for today's purposes, we're talking about making a copy in Tableau Online. I have a couple examples down here at the bottom again. MySQL is an example of something that you could hit live as well as an extract. The most important principle you can think about here is if you can hit it live, you can make an extract. So everything that's on this side, is it the right side? You could potentially move over to the left side, but there are a few things that are extract only. As I mentioned on the previous slide, Google Analytics and Salesforce are examples of cloud-based data sources that we can only extract from. And then embedded versus published data sources. And this is pretty key, especially for the on-premises data that we're talking about today. What we're really talking about here is something internal to Tableau as opposed to your data. It's how Tableau stores the data, not in a physical file necessarily, but sort of logically. Embedded means it's inside the workbook that you're actually dealing with. And published data source is something that's published in addition to your workbook. And and you can do all sorts of fancy things with it. You can attach data sources to multiple workbooks. You can see little workbooks out on the side there. So those are a couple concepts we'll use throughout the talk here. And I did want to give you a nice little analogy to think about these things, since those were all like big, fat, fancy words. Connecting to your data is a little bit like watching your favorite TV show. I don't know if you can see the Game of Thrones out here, but if any of you does anyone know No? Nobody. Okay, nobody. If you were to say you got Game of Thrones through Netflix DVDs, like it's really great because you can binge watch it, right? All the way up to the end of the DVD. And then you have to sort of wait and like mail it back and get it back. So there's a little bit of work or waiting. But the nice thing about it is it just comes to your house. You don't have to do a lot of work to get it, just a little bit of time to wait. Cloud live data is a little bit more like streaming. So if you've got the whole season, like, hey, you've got all night. We could do the whole thing. The big deal is maybe you have to wait for a few minutes for it to sort of spool up before it actually starts playing. And then on-premises extracts are a little bit more like Redbox. It's a lot like a cloud extract, except that there's a little extra step you have to do. It's not that it actually comes to your house. You just have to drive down to the 7-Eleven to get the next three episodes. So those are 3 things to think about. And I'll use these icons throughout the rest of the slides here, so we can hark back to them. There's one other type of data. I said at the beginning you can refresh all your different types of data. That's definitely true. But if you get yourself into a situation where you have an on-premises embedded data, those are not refreshable. They're a little bit more like a snapshot. It's a picture you take it's a picture you take on a family vacation that you want to see in the future, but it's not necessarily something you're going to update all the time. These are great and easy to do. Most people use them with static files of some sort, something you grabbed from the internet, or just an Excel file that you wanted to use for one time. And the reason I mention this is because it's easy to sort of end up doing this by default. But it's not as if this is like you've gotten yourself into a permanently unrefreshable world here. You can republish and get yourself into a refreshable situation. All right. I think we're moving along pretty well here, but do you guys have any questions? Yes? Yep. No, I don't believe so. So I think your question is, can I connect to an Office 365 document and extract data from it? We have about 13 cloud-based data sources today. Most of them are like large DBMS systems. You're actually a little bit closer to something that we would call a web data connector. That was the way that we connect to things like Google Sheets, and we'll talk about those at the end. As far as I know, I don't know that there's an Office 365 connector right now, but come up here afterwards and I can find out for sure. All right. So we talked about a couple concepts, and I wanted to talk a few things about your data itself. Hey, the whole reason you came today was to figure out how to make your data fresh. And it's probably not you that cares so much. It's really more the people that you're producing dashboards for. They probably want to know, hey, yeah, how fresh is my data? So one quick trick about this, there's a tag that you can use in either the title or the caption of your worksheets or dashboards that will actually display when the last time this data was updated. So this makes it very transparent and pretty obvious for whoever your customers are to say, oh yeah, no, I'm positive that this was updated recently, or no, this is 2 weeks out of date, we have a problem. So that's one really great way. It takes up a little bit more space on your dashboards, and so you may want to use it judiciously. The other things you can do, you can check in online the details for your workbook or the details for your data source, and it will show you, hey, this was last updated, especially if you have extracts, last updated at this time, and we're expecting to get another update at this time. It'll give you a little bit of information about that. The third way is the sad trombone way. Here's another example of how you can actually see this in online. But the third way is you can just wait for your users to tell you, like, oh yeah, my sales report is like 6 weeks out of date. That's the sad trombone moment. Like this is not how you want to do this. So the first 2 options I mentioned here hopefully keep you out of that situation. And then the techniques we'll talk about today to keep your data up to date, so people don't even really have to have those questions. If you're ever looking at a dashboard and you say, hey, I know that this dashboard looks like it doesn't have the very latest, the big trick, of course, is to push the refresh button. Now, some of you, I don't know how many of you have used internet browsers. There's a pretty common metaphor in the browser called the refresh button. We also have one in Tableau. It's actually in Tableau Desktop. but it appears in the toolbar of your browser. You can see the little can I mentioned earlier with the little recycle icon on it. That's the one you want to click. So if you're refreshing the browser session, that's probably not going to do exactly what you want. So that little refresh button is key to think about. Get me the very latest. All right. So we've talked a couple specifics about your data, a few concepts. We've talked about TV shows. Now we're actually going to dive into how to actually keep cloud data fresh. The very first thing you can do with your cloud data, and this is the thing that I think many people do with cloud data, is just connect to it live. Meaning, in this case, I don't know how many of you have used on-prem Tableau servers, but this is very analogous to saying, I want my server to connect directly to my MySQL database. It's on premises, except you're doing it all in the cloud. The great thing about this is that you're always going to get the most current data. This is very good for a situation that I call timeliness, where timeliness is very important. I really need to know what's happened in the last 15 minutes. The downside of this, a little bit like streaming, is that when I push play, right, to start episode 641 of Game of Thrones, I have to wait for a few minutes for that to start up because the streaming is just buffering up and just kicking off. So when you use a live query, we actually will go and talk to the database. And as we mentioned a few minutes ago, it may be real close, maybe far away, but that round trip will take a little bit of time. And the cost is that vises will render a little bit more slowly. It's not always very dramatic, but it is a cost, and there are reasons to do other things. So this type of data really applies to cloud-based data sources, Amazon Redshift, Google BigQuery. This type of data, live queries, can either be embedded or published. We treat embedded data a little bit differently, but for live data sources, embedded data is treated essentially the same. You can always query the live data and always refresh it. So if you're concerned about publishing data sources, this is a perfectly fine way to go. The big note about making a live connection is we sort of start off in live and keep you in live. But if you, along the way, switch yourself to using an extract, you can see the little green box up there is on live. If you were to switch over to extract at any point during our publication chain, you could end up with an extract. So if you want live, keep yourself on live. This is on the data source pane, which you can see right off there next to sheet 1. Set yourself up live there. When actually publishing, so this is part of the publishing dialog, you can set up to embed your password. This is what we would normally recommend unless you have a special reason for it to make users prompt. Because what we're doing here is running a query every time the user actually accesses a dashboard. If you set it up to prompt, what will happen is it say, hey, we're going to go get you that dashboard. What's the password? Which is typically very annoying. There are good reasons to do this, especially if you're using row-level security or a couple other fancier techniques. But generally speaking, embedding is probably the right way to go. Let's see what else we got here. When you publish, if you go through the Tableau publication process, we'll end you up in the web, online. And actually, a nice thing about this is it's very straightforward. Once you're done publishing, you don't need to set any schedules, don't need to do anything else. We'll just go and get the data for you. And one other note here about making sure that online has access to your data source. So if you're in AWS or any place else, you'll actually need to go to that database and give online access to it. So if you haven't done, what normally we call it whitelisting, if you haven't taken that step and you're like, I've got the right drivers, I'm hitting the database, but I'm not getting anything, you're probably getting as far as the AWS firewall and stopping. So those IPs are available in our help every place else, but it will not work until you do that, so make sure to get that done. So the other thing we're going to talk about is extracts. And I mentioned a few minutes ago that live is a little bit like streaming. Extracts are a little bit more like Netflix, where when you get it, you got all of it. But you may have to wait until the next delivery to get something else updated. For example, you may get 3 episodes of Game of Thrones. If you want 4, 5, and 6, they're going to come, but not until you mail the first 3 back in. A good thing about this is that your vises render faster. I said a little bit earlier, extracting makes a copy of your data and sends it to online. It doesn't make a copy of all of your data. We can talk about how to filter your data and scope it correctly to what you need, but it really is making a copy and sending it to online, which means that that round trip we talked about earlier of going off and getting your data and then coming back is very short, very fast. We use our fast data server to help make that quicker. Extracting is pretty straightforward. You can see on the screen here, normally what you would do on the data menu is go off and for an individual data source, say, yeah, I want to make this an extract. And the dialog looks a little bit like this. The dialog, this is a place where you would say, I want to keep certain values or filter certain values out. This is also where you would set up incremental extracts. We'll talk about those in the fancy extract section at the end. But this is a pretty good dialog to be able to say, hey, yeah, go and make a copy of just the data that I need here. That'll get it up to online. When you publish in Tableau, recent versions of Tableau 9 and 10, we've really made the publishing experience a little bit easier. Generally speaking, when you're making extracts, we will help you, even if you're publishing a workbook, publish either the embedded extract or the published data source along with it. So one quick note here, by default we'll do embedding, which is perfectly fine if you've got online data. Online will be able to go out and hit that embedded data and query it back out. But for on-prem data that we'll talk about in a few minutes, you may actually want to publish these as a separate data source. Another reason to publish as a separate data source is so other people in your organization can make use of one extract, as opposed to scheduling their own extracts. So you might go and get the same data twice. That's expensive and takes a long time to do, so let's not do that. Publishing data sources is a great way to optimize that. When you publish your extract, because we're not doing a live query, we're making this copy, we need to make it on a regular basis. And so in the publication process, it'll actually pop up this little dialog here and say, hey, congratulations, you've published this. Why don't we go ahead and set a schedule for it? So in online, and this is again where online is going and getting your data and pulling it back, we can set schedules on an hourly basis. You can set the refresh frequency pretty high. Because online is actually performing this, you can sort of imagine that online is now a giant ETL processing machine, and it has a whole bunch of extracts to go off and do, not just yours, but everybody's. And so you do have to be a little bit careful about picking when to run your extracts. I'll show you how to find out when they run. But generally, a good time to run them is when most people are asleep. Seems like pretty solid advice there. You do still have to whitelist online. So online still has to be able to go and hit your cloud data source. Yeah, I'll get to you in just a second. That's cool. So today, you can see the dialog that we have here, which will give you some options every hour of the day. Very soon, I don't know if Danny Bain is in the audience here, but early next year, we will have a newer version of this sort of scheduling facility we're calling self-service, and gives you a little bit more flexibility in when you schedule, how you set priorities, and makes how we handle time zones a little bit more predictable. So, great. Your question is, hey, when I schedule an extract, the time that I pick, what time am I looking at? What you're actually looking at is the adjusted time zone for your browser. So if your browser is, if you're in Europe, you'll see something close to UTC. If you're on the west coast of the United States, you'll see something -7 or 8 hours. It's actually, and we will readjust those as you execute them, as they're executed in online. So if you pick midnight in your browser and you're in Europe, it will run at midnight in Europe. Cool. Yeah, go ahead.
And in that new system,
yep.
Is it going to allow you to select sequential at different times?
In the new scheduling system, can you select sequential at different times? Yeah. I see. In the system today, you can run sequential extracts, but only at a limited number of times. I actually do not know the answer to that. I suspect the answer is yes, but come up afterwards, we'll write it down and figure out the answer for you. Normally, online will attempt to run parallel refreshes, so we'll go off and get as many as we can, but there's obviously some processing limits, and there are cases in which you'd want to do sequential, where you've got one job that needs to run first, a second one. So, but Danny can help us answer that if he shows up. All right. Oh, got one more thing here. Hey, it's nice that I said all these words, but why don't we actually go and see how it works? So let's see here. Drop out of PowerPoint here for a minute. Oop, there we go. So sorry. Okay. So we have a lot of people at conference this year, and some large proportion of them are Daves like me. This is actually just a very, very simple, straightforward live data set that I've got running on an Azure or a AWS instance. And what I want to show you, if we refresh this right now, nothing has changed, and so nothing will change. You can see how long the refresh takes. It's pretty fast. I wonder if I got my SQL console set up back here. Nope. Oh, SQL's not going to run here. So it's going to take me a minute to figure this little bit out. I'm actually going to move ahead. You're going to have to trust me on the live extracts here until I can get things working correctly. But I did also want to show you, no, I do have to make SQL work. Does anybody know any good knock-knock jokes? Okay, so here we are. This is just a standard SQL console. You can see that I'm just adding 100 Daves. And so I'm actually just going to go ahead and execute this right now. And let's make sure it actually succeeds. Woohoo, look at that. Successful execution. So if you remember, just moments ago, we looked at this, and it said there are 1,500 Daves. So let's go ahead and refresh this right now. Again, this is the live side of things. So I haven't had to take any extra action to make changes here. Oh, 1,600 Daves, hooray! So this is because we're going off and doing the live query and getting the data out of the AWS database. Here's the exact same data, but this is extracted. So some hours ago, actually I think it tells you right here at 1 o'clock today, I went off and refreshed this, and no matter how many times I push that button, this is not going to change because the underlying extract has not changed. So what we're going to do right now is I'm actually going to go take a look at this data source. So here's the workbook. Here is the data source itself, and you can see this is off on Amazon. Right here, I can say, hey, I want to refresh this. And for a cloud-based data source, I can refresh it right now. So I'm going to do this. Again, what online is doing is saying, oh, I got to go put this in my queue, and there's a bunch of other stuff running, so you got to wait your turn, which means I have to talk for a few minutes while you guys, well, it actually runs its job. But actually, it runs pretty quickly, and I wanted to show you, here's how you can go and understand how my jobs are actually running, how my refresh jobs are running in online. So this is a quick report that we run that just says, hey, what extracts jobs have run, what was the result, how long did they take? So you can see that just a few minutes ago, oh, how lucky. Let's see here. This says 150. Let's give this a shot. But you can see I've run this a couple times earlier. We had a different job here that failed on my account because I don't have the data source set up properly. But let's go back and look at the workbook. Yeah. So I actually just restarted this, and it actually shows 1,600 now. So online's actually gone off to AWS, got the updated data, and it's now displaying it. And I didn't even have to push that little refresh button. So I didn't show you a lot about scheduling here, but hopefully that will show you, hey, it is perfectly possible to go and get the latest information, either on an extracted basis or a live basis. Do you guys have questions about that? All right, I know that was super exciting. The demos only get better from here, I swear.
So just to be clear, these are both cloud sources.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. These are, in fact, it's the same. It's two different data sources on the same database. So I only had to make one insert to update both. I've got one extract and one live. And the question was, the stuff I just saw, is that all cloud data? It is. It's all in AWS. All right, so you've got a cloud system called Online. You've got some cloud data. It's all working very happily. And all your data is in the cloud. Whose data is all in the cloud? Yeah, that's what I thought. Oh, this guy is. So in many cases, I think maybe for many years, people would be transitioning to keeping more and more data in the cloud. There's some data that's just never going to get there. And so if you have this cloud service, many companies are going cloud first. We want cloud application. Well, that's great, but how do I get my data into online? And how do I keep it fresh, even more importantly? So for on-premises data, and this is, again, pretty much anything that Tableau can connect to, whether it be file-based data sources or SAP HANA or anything you can connect to, what we really do is we ask for an extract. And that extract is what gets pushed up to online. Now, the important thing about on-premises data is that it's private, right? You got the firewall that you want to keep secure. And if you say to your IT departments, oh, just please make me some holes in our secure firewall, they will laugh and laugh and laugh. So inside online, not inside online, but for online, we actually have a utility that you can use to keep refresh extracts up to date. And it works by being on the inside of your firewall, creating the extract, and pushing the extract up to online in almost exactly the same way that you would do if you actually had an intern or somebody else just republishing manually on a regular basis, but more reliable. So what kind of data are these? It's any kind of data back behind your firewall. Why do I have to do this step and make it a published extract? Can't I just embed the data? Actually, you cannot. It's really a question of whether or not we're updating the workbook or updating the data. So to get yourself into this situation, you have to publish a data source. How can I keep it fresh and online? We'll use the sync client, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. And really what it's doing is just republishing the extract. I mentioned when we were talking about cloud data that you have to whitelist online's IP. You do not have to do that. Don't need to talk to anybody about opening up your corporate firewall. And then how do I make an extract? And how do I get that up to online? We'll show you that here in just a second. To publish an extract, we've made this a lot better in Tableau version 10. You really don't have to take the extra step of publishing a data source. Even when you publish your workbook, if you're attached to, we'll give you the option of actually publishing your data source separately. So this is one of the little options down in the publish dialog that you may not be using all that often. But down here where it says data sources, if you want to publish this to online and keep it fresh, this is the dialog you want to, it's called an Uber. This is the area you want to go to. So pick publish separately there off this list. Otherwise, you get into that snapshot realm of embedded data. So when you publish, it'll actually tell you, oh, hey, by the way, you published two things. You published your workbook and a published data source. And hey, why don't we go ahead and schedule that? So here's our scheduling dialog. It looks a little bit different than the cloud scheduling dialog, but is it doing essentially the same thing? So it allows you to schedule the days that you would like, the hours that you would want. We can actually refresh them up to every 15 minutes, which is very, very fast. You would really only want to do that for a very small extract. The interesting difference here is that it's actually asking you the name of a computer to run that extract on. So this is how Sync Client normally works. And what it's going to do is actually look for that computer and say, hey, I want you to run an extract at this time. Then that computer that's running that Sync Client will contact online and say, do you have a schedule for me? It'll pull the schedule request down and say, oh, I just need to go make this extract. It'll run it and push it back up to online. Hey, somebody out there's got a question, well, why can't I just do this live? We'll talk about that in just a minute. So for the Sync Client, there are a couple things, best practices that we find. The sync client is really, you can use it in a couple different ways, a couple different models. One model is what we call a self-service model, where I want to keep this workbook up to date, and I'm going to rely really on myself. Our publishing process lets you do this very easily. It pretty much says, oh, I see you're running a computer that you can use this on. The name of your computer is this. I've started sync client in the background, and so if you just want to set it up to use your computer, easy peasy, works great. The big trick here is that that computer has to have like electricity to it in order to run those refreshes. In fact, one of the ways that sync client starts is it runs as an application, meaning that it runs when you as a user are logged in. We just released a little while ago the ability to run as a service, meaning that it runs whenever the computer's on, runs as you. But still, if your computer looks like this, and you close the laptop lid, like, yeah, that's not going to run. It can't magically repower the computer. So that self-service world is very convenient, works great, especially if you're publishing from a desktop machine that you know is going to be on. But it may not be 100% reliable. You take your laptop home over the weekend, those refreshes won't run, unless you're VPN'd in. An alternative to this is to move to more of a central sync situation where maybe you ask somebody in the IT department or somebody to set up a machine that runs all the time. Normally we'd ask you sign into sync as a service account, which doesn't have to be any special account, just means an account that it's kind of its job to do this. That account needs to be a publisher because what you're doing is republishing data. So if you set it up as a interactor or something else or change it later, you'll kind of get yourself into a little bit of trouble. The downside to this is that you have to invent a little bit of workflow to get that service account user to know, go get this sync job and attach it to this sync client. One other note about that, we actually do require a little bit of interaction on the sync client itself, depending on the type of data source that you're using. This is a little bit tricky, so if anybody's already nodding off, which is entirely understandable, but this is a good time to wake up. Right here on this copy, the sync client here, I'm showing you the kind that has a little, hey, I need some help indicator on it, this little orange box here. The reason in this case that this data source is asking for a little bit of help is because it needs database credentials. When you publish a data source, you can embed your credentials. We talked about this a little bit earlier. But online is never actually going to give those up because it's just a basic security thing. Nope, we're not going to send those off to anybody in the world who asks for them. And especially because it's your on-prem data, we're going to ask you to put those in again. So if you set up with the centralized sync model, and even if you publish yourself and your data sources require credentials, you may see this little triangle. That little pencil's your friend. It will help you go to the spot where you need to enter credentials. We also will ask for file paths if you're using a file-based data source because a file path may be different depending on what machine you're on. But you can see all our little controls out here. Refresh this now, take me back to online so I can go and set some schedules, and that triangle will go away once you start successfully refreshing. Yeah, go ahead.
With the sync client, whenever you do add the credentials, that stays stored locally?
Yep. Yeah. The question was, hey, if I add my credentials to the sync client, where do you send them? We send them to the secure vault on the computer. It's provided by the operating system. It's also where we keep the credentials that we use to log into online in cases that we use those. There's many cases where we use SAML tokens and refresh tokens. So all stored locally, all stored securely. Okay, hey, well, it's nice again that we said all those words, but let's actually see it happen. So, one note about the sync client, I think I actually have this on the slide here. Sync client runs on Windows machines, so it does not actually run on this machine. It runs on 64-bit Windows machines. So if you ever get yourself into a situation where like, oh, hey, I don't know how to launch it, it's probably because you're either running a 32-bit version or maybe you're running on a Mac.
When are you going to make that sync client standalone?
Someday soon.
Okay.
It's probably not as soon as the live query agent stuff, but it really is an important step on our roadmap, mostly so that we can get into IT departments because you can't have everybody installing Tableau Desktop just to run the little agent. Okay, so let's take a look here. What I'm going to do is connect to a Windows machine. So this is a VM that's running in our OpenStack environment at Tableau headquarters. I logged into this earlier, but it logged me out. So you get to see me. Oh no, that is correct. Type in my password here. Ooh. No, I'm just in embarrassing presenter mode. Haha! All right. So here's an on-premises data source. This is a simple Excel file. And you can see here's my sync client running down here. I actually want to run back out on my Mac here and show you how most people actually use it. I don't know if you guys were in the keynote this morning, but Ashley Kramer talked about sort of the live query agent, which we'll talk about in a few seconds. She talked about some boots data. This is my vastly simplified version of that demo. So you can see we have a few boots here, and we can refresh this. Because you already know about extracts, you'll know that when I refresh this, what I'm doing is I'm just hitting the data stored in online. So no changes will happen here. So we got, what do we have, about 400 leather boots here. You can see there we are, 400 leather boots. Can somebody tell me the name of a different type of boot that we can type in here? Knee-high, all right. I was going to go with go-go, but how many should we have? 2? You need at least 2, right? One knee-high boot doesn't work. I guess they come in pairs these days. Okay. So I'm just going to save this. So now this file's on my VM. And here's my sync client now. I'm not actually going to schedule this because then you really would have to listen to all my knock-knock jokes. But I'm just going to manually run this refresh here. I will show you real quickly, because this is a file-based data source, and I just clicked that little pencil here. Here's the information Tableau needs to know about file-based data sources or sync client. It lives in this location, right? If you don't know where it is, you can't get to it. But let's go ahead and refresh this. So normally, I think this will end up taking about 15 seconds, which is not long enough for a bad joke. This is a good reason to demos like this, like tiny data, really helps. Have I told you the one about the chicken? Wow, 2 times as long. Even earlier today, it didn't take this long. Oh, sure. Yeah, great point. The question is, well, it's nice that it's running that little spinner, but what is it doing? So what's actually happening here is that the sync client is actually calling parts of Tableau Desktop and saying, hey, do all those things that you would do if somebody clicked all the right menu buttons, but just do it on the side now. So it's actually going to this Excel file, making an extract of the entire Excel file, and then republishing it to online. Does that help? Was that? I can tell you more words, but they may not be helpful. Okay. That was enough words. Thank you very much. I'll pay you after. So you can see that we finished here. Because sync client, we really expect it to run unattended. We don't provide a lot of like, hooray, success. We don't play a special noise or anything like that. But when I go back out here, come on, baby. I'm actually gonna. There we go. So I did just restart this viz. You can see that it's changed quite a bit. We've now got 1,000 knee-high boots. And so that's a perfectly good example of how you keep a very tiny amount of data fresh. But this will work for many, many different types of data. We have customers who run this extract. The refresh lasted somewhere about 40 seconds, which seems exceedingly long to me. But we have people who run very, very long extracts and run them reliably. And so this is a great way to keep your on-prem data fresh.
How long do they run?
What's that?
Hours long extracts?
Yep. You can do it. Like the longer you let it go, like the more chances, something's going to fall over. So I'd say once you get up above a couple hours, like you probably want to find some ways to optimize your extracts. But it's certainly possible. We've seen that. We've seen those run reliably. Okay, so that was our quick little demo there. A couple words about the future. Come on, future. There we go. So I think today in the keynote, if you guys were watching, if you managed to attend that, we talked about something called the Live Query Agent. The initial version of it, we call it Live Query and Sync because it really will be part of the Sync client. But what it means is that you have that same sort of setup where there's an agent inside your firewall whose job it is to contact online on an outbound basis. So we can keep it secure. We're not asking you to open ports on your firewall. All the transmissions are encrypted, but it can go and pick up a query, run the query, send it back, send the results back. So that's something that'll be coming out soon. I think Ashley said sometime early next year, so we're working on that. So bear that in mind, coming soon. The question is, well, why would you do this? Again, it's really a matter of timeliness. I think oftentimes people have they're excited by a live query because it's like, oh, always get the very latest. The cost, again, is that it may take a little bit longer to run. Extracts are actually a very reasonable solution in almost all cases. But if you really do have something that's very, very timely, live query is the way to go. We did have a couple other questions like, is that the only thing I can do? Can I only run Sync client? No, you can also talk to my good friend Ben here. Ben is a product manager like me for the Tableau SDK. So this is a way that you can both create and update extracts programmatically. We've got an SDK that's accessible in Python, C++, Java. And this is if you have a long ETL chain that you control programmatically, this is a great way to say, complete this step, complete this step, complete this step. Now I want to kick off my refreshes. So perfectly decent if you are writing in Python or Java. There's also one other way to schedule refreshes, and that is using the extremely long and precisely named Tableau command line extract utility. I probably even said that wrong. But this is a way that if you've been using Tableau for many years, you probably are pushing extracts to online. Simple command line utility, highly scriptable. In most cases, we find that people migrate to Sync client just because it's a little bit easier to use. But if you need to script refreshes into your process, this is a fine way to do it. So.
Does it still require a desktop?
Yep. Yeah, there is. The question was, hey, if I'm using the Tableau extract command line utility, do I still need a copy of desktop to actually make it run? As it turns out, many of the guts of what's in Tableau desktop are what allow the extracts to be made. So, yep.
Having you have 5 desktop licenses for developers. Do you need to get another license to run this centrally?
The question is, if I've got 5 licenses for developers, do I need to go buy another license in order to run this in a central fashion? Let me see if I got your scenario right. My 4 colleagues and I want to publish extracts, and we want to have something centrally run this. Do we need to go buy another copy of desktop? The answer is no. Sorry, I was thumbs up that guy because we got 5 minutes left. With every copy of Tableau desktop, you actually get 2 licenses for it. So it's not as if you can only use it on this machine at this time. So yeah, you can certainly say, hey, my second license is over here running a central sync. I got 5 minutes left, quite a bit of stuff to do. So I'm going to start going faster. And then if you guys have questions, come up and talk to me afterwards because I'm here for like 2 more days. I did want to talk a little bit about web data connectors, and I'm hoping I will blow your minds. The reason that I think this is a little bit mind-blowing is because web data connectors are a different type of data. It's really about connecting to things that you can access over HTTP protocols, REST, JSON, a whole bunch of other stuff. It's open source, meaning that if you have a specialized data source, I talked to somebody earlier who's using a graph database, and they said, oh, it's got a REST interface. Like, well, if you just want access to the data, this might be how to do it. So you can write your own custom connectors. The thing that's a little bit different about it, it's not handled in exactly the same way that live versus on-prem data are. It's kind of a hybrid of both. And what I mean by that is that you can access the data over the internet or over HTTP, but in order to keep it fresh, you can actually use the sync client to do this. Did anybody get on the internet at the beginning of the talk? I said, hey, we've got this fancy demo. If you have a minute, if you have your connected device, there's a hip chat room here that's publicly accessible. And I know that it's got a super friendly name, but if you have a chance to go add some words in there that you would be okay with lots of people seeing on a screen, this would be a fine time to do it. So I'm actually going to go take a look at mine here. How about that weather? Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, that's a good idea. There you go. So go off and type your words in. And what we're going to do with the rest of the demo here, after we get a few words in here, I'll show you the viz that has the like 20-odd words that I've managed to type in the last 4 days into my little hip chat room. So that's their initial state, and then we'll refresh it, and we'll get it whatever else everybody else has typed in. So. Did anybody manage to get into that room? The only tricky thing about this is that HipChat, when you log in as a guest, it doesn't record your name, so everybody's words will show up as null besides mine. So it's very disappointing, I know, but best I could do. Let's go see how we can do this. Did everybody get the URL who's going to try it out? Yes. Good. Okay. So I'm going to run back over to my my VM here. You can see we have a little HipChat connector. And let me just show you on the browser real quick. Here's our mind-blowing demo word cloud. So you can see me and a few of my friends have been typing some words in here, not too many. And then here's the null that we'll see in a few minutes here, all encoded according to who actually typed them. Mind-blowing. Okay, good. Let's go back out here to our HipChat connector and just refresh this. So when I showed you some refreshes earlier, we were refreshing from Amazon. We got those live queries, we got extracts. Then I showed you refreshes using a file-based data source on a local computer back behind a firewall somewhere using the sync client. And this is actually connecting to a service, right? This is HipChat. Oh, it says we're finished. So this really is an internet accessible thing, but we're using the sync client to keep it fresh. So let's go ahead and refresh here. There we go. Some new words. And I think if we look down in here, how about that weather? We can find weather up here somewhere. Yeah, so this is how you can use sync client to connect to web data connectors. This is restricted to things that are either unauthenticated or using basic auth. There's some tricky things we might be able to do, but it does give you an option for keeping web data up to date. So hopefully that's very helpful. You guys got other questions? Does anybody not see their word up here? Yeah, this is actually, this date right here is the server date. Ooh, nobody saw that. That's good. Okay, well, we're going to move on. Okay, a few last words, because we are almost out of time, just about fancy extracts. So as I was talking about earlier, making an extract makes a copy of your data. Perhaps your data is as small as Boot's inventory, but I doubt it, which means they can be very big. And so once you start to get a large amount of data, things to do to optimize it will be filtering down the amount of data that you're retrieving, maybe limiting it in time or limiting it to the number of columns that you have. Or you can actually use the optimization that Tableau has built in. This is kind of hidden down on a menu here, but deep in the data menu, you can see there is actually an optimization option. What this is doing is hiding a bunch of columns that are, like, perhaps they're not used, okay? Let's not go get those. It'll pre-aggregate some of the values that come out of your extracts. One And also the extract dialog will give you lots of ways of restricting down what data you're getting. If you want to know about how long your extracts are running now, we actually showed this a little bit earlier, but I did just want to briefly look at it again. I'm just going to go to it. So on the status menu, and this is for system admins, site admins is what I should say, background tasks for extracts. This is the way you can actually look at the extracts that have run in online. It does not show you sync client extracts yet. But it'll say, oh, hey, by the way, here's how much time I spent. Here's where things went right or wrong. Here's the total amount of work I've done, and here's when those things happen. And it's lovely ways to filter this. So this should give you a very good sense of like, holy cow, like I'm running a 4-hour extract. Yeah, you might want to find some ways to optimize that. One other note about incremental extracts. Incremental extracts are also, there we go, a lovely way to reduce the amount of data that you send in any one extract. So you can imagine if you started off with 500 megabytes of data, the next day you might be adding another 500 megabytes, 1 megabyte. Instead of sending all that data again, you can say, just give me everything after this point in time, or after this ID or this indicator. The important thing to think about here is what Tableau will do is get everything after that indicator. So if you can imagine, date is a very easy thing to use because it monotonically increases. There's always 1 more second in the future. What it will not do is say, oh, you've updated values behind this, this ID or this date. It won't go back and delete things or update values back behind there. But it will tack new information onto the end of your extract. So your extract will grow over time, but you don't have to send all the data every single time. Is anybody using these right now? Yeah, works good? Okay, excellent. And here's where you would say, hey, this is the value to pay attention to in terms of ID or like a time value to tell me what's new. Still going? Okay. That's about it. We've got a couple just quick recaps. Your visits should always be able to have fresh data in them. Hey, if they're not getting fresh data in them now, probably change the way that you're publishing a little bit, and that will allow you to get there. And the refresh really happens where your data is, or where your application is. If your data is in the cloud, the refresh happens in online. If your data is on-prem, it happens on a local computer, and that computer will push it up to online. I would be happy to hang around if anybody has more questions. I think that's about it. There's a couple other sessions that I think would be very interesting for you folks if you're still, there's plenty more time to see more things. So here are the ones that are probably most relevant because they take place tomorrow. Tab command, we're going to have a session on actually optimizing extracts. And then extracts again on Thursday, and a little bit about data security. So that's it. If you guys have any questions, please let me know. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. There's a survey. It's always very helpful for us so we can figure out how to make this better. And hey, have a great rest of your conference. See you soon.